Welcome everybody, and thank you for being here with us today. I want to take a moment at the beginning here to acknowledge the sponsors that we've had throughout this project, being the IESO, we have QMC and SetPoint. Some of you may recall that we conducted the initial strategic energy management project back in 2022, which concluded with a similar webinar, as well as the publishing of an SEM guide for school boards. This year's project, we revisited that work to see the progress the boards have made and what steps in the process they still needed some assistance with. Today's session will include a look at the updated analysis for the 24 participating schools, as well as a discussion with the boards and industry. So the first item of business, I just wanted to go over a couple of admin topics here. So for any questions that you may have during the session, please use the Q&A options if it's related to content. We'll try and answer as many questions as we can throughout the webinar. Otherwise, it'll be answered in a Q&A document afterwards. We'd ask that you reserve the chat for any technology questions or related content to that. I'm going to hand it over to Ian to get us started.
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn, and good morning to all our friends in Alberta, and actually good morning to everybody. It's actually a morning session this time in the East as well, but we begin, as we always do, with Climate Challenge Network events with the land acknowledgement. We do acknowledge with great respect the ancestral and the unceded territories of the Inuit, Métis, the First Nations people that we share these lands with. We're meeting on the traditional homes of many nations, including the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. This webinar is emanating from Toronto, which is subject to Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit River. And the final sentence is the one that's most meaningful to us. We believe and hope that the work we're all doing, and the reason why everybody is here this morning, will make a meaningful contribution to our collective responsibility as stewards of the environment. So next slide, please, Carolyn. We wanted to begin with kind of a bit of a message of why we're all here. This will not be new to any of you. You wouldn't be on this call if you weren't concerned about this, but it's good to provide the context. Again, the why always matters. We're going to talk a lot about what and how. The why matters. And the statement we're making here that I believe everybody on this call will agree with is climate change is the defining issue of our times, that it is a global challenge and it's one that's not going away. Pandemics and wars are terrible, but mercifully they do ultimately come to an end. The climate change is not going to come to an end. It's only a question of how bad it becomes. And we see K-12 schools right on the front line of all the activity. You're significant emitters through the number of buildings that you have and through transportation and through other parts. You're also seeing the physical and mental effects on students of the growing anxiety. We talk about climate anxiety these days, and it's a very real thing. And it's increasingly going to affect students, and the people get it, population gets it. And I'm sure you're seeing through the communities that your schools reside within, growing expectations of leadership coming from all organizations, in particular public sector organizations. So climate change is a big deal. We're tracking progress with respect to buildings, and Canada's goal, as you may know, is a 41% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions due to buildings by 2030 relative to a 2019 baseline. As of today, emissions due to buildings are going up by 1% a year. So we're looking for a 41% reduction. We're almost halfway through that period. We're going in the wrong direction, and with that trajectory, we're going to miss those goals by a wide margin. Climate Challenge Network, we study this stuff a lot. If we miss the 2030 goals, which we're threatening to do, very hard to make 2040 and impossible to make 2050. So, we're not going to get into it today, but the consequences of not getting climate response right are truly catastrophic. And we already see it, but as they say, we ain't seen nothing yet. Things will get worse. We've collectively talking about thinking globally. It's a global issue. It's a global concern. Perhaps it's one thing that can bring nations together, but it's all down to local action. Governments can't fix this. It's down to every individual, every organization to play its part, and every school board and every school has a role to play in closing the gap. And if we all do our parts, then we change direction, we change trajectory, and we can do the best we can to avoid some of the consequences. So we take this idea of urgency, opportunity for leadership, and responsibility to get it right very seriously. And again, thank you for taking time from your busy days to be here today to talk about some of the what and the how. The next slide, please. So while this refers back to the original strategic energy management project Carolyn mentioned in 2022, the guide arising from that work is still up on the Sustainable Schools website. We'll be updating it. We'll talk about that a bit later with everything that we've learned in the 2 years since. But we want to talk about like where are schools at right now. Here is typical benchmarking coming out of Climate Challenge Network work, and this ski slope is representative of what we see with office buildings, with hospitals, with municipal buildings, with colleges, with multi-residential buildings. We've got, and none of this, every horizontal line on here is an individual school, and the blue is electricity use, and every sector is a bit different. Electricity is not that variable within school buildings. There's lights, there's fans, there's some plug load, there's pumps, heating pumps in the winter, but electricity is not that variable. You can see some have significantly more opportunity. The blue line, which is kilowatt hours per square foot, is a bit longer with some, and those are targets for electricity reduction. But the big variable is the orange, which is typically natural gas consumption, but there's oil, there's propane, there's different fuel sources within there. The orange in Ontario, not so in Alberta, but the orange in Ontario is where all the greenhouse gas emissions are. And that's where we're seeing the not big, but the massive opportunity to do things differently, to get it right. If we can get all of those orange lines just to the top quartile, if we can get all of those lower part of this chart just to the top quartile, we cut emissions for the sector by a little over 30%. And that's a very big number. We'll show you some of the numbers in just a moment. The schools that actually took part in the project, we'll talk about what the criteria were for selecting them, which was an unexpected and unexplained jump in energy use the previous year. But you can see they ended up distributed pretty evenly across this whole chart. We got some at the bottom that are really high users, some at the top that are relatively low energy intensity, but they were all characterized by the fact that they showed an unexplained jump in the sustainable schools reporting for the year that was for the year that we were looking at. And that's what characterized approaching the board saying, what happened? What can we learn to prevent this happening in future? So this is the foundation. These are the schools we were working with during this 2-year period. Next slide, please. And in terms of the opportunity, again, those of you who are following sustainable schools, every year we hold a webinar and update all the data we can get. We track all 72 school boards in Ontario through the publicly reported data, and In the past, the Calgary board, who I believe is on this call, have been good enough to provide their data. So every school board that has data that's willing to share it with us anonymously, we will always produce these numbers so we can track more and more of how the sector is moving forward. But the top chart there on the right-hand column looks at a 3-year period from the 2018-19 pre-COVID level year to the 2021-22 year, which was well into COVID by the time we get into there. And over that 3-year period, you can see the numbers for yourself. There were 42 school boards out of all the ones that we were tracking that showed savings that averaged 3.1% in electricity consumption. The opposite picture, there's 25 school boards showed savings, but the net across all the school boards was a 4.6% increase. Overall, energy went up, greenhouse gas emissions went up. There's room for encouragement. If you look on the left-hand column there, the 2019-20 versus, there's the 1-year period. So before COVID came along, in fact, we were going in the right direction. We had 16.9% electricity savings across the whole sector, 4.3% gas savings. Then COVID came along. You can see the damage that it caused in the middle and the following. But the net effect, again, is the climate doesn't care about COVID. The planet doesn't give us any breaks for the fact that things are difficult and they're challenging. And overall, from 2019-20, which is the federal government's baseline, to 21-22, we're going backwards in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and there's work to be done to recover and get back on track in time for 2030. The chart at the bottom, again, comes directly out of the most recent Sustainable Schools report. This is comparing the energy use of every individual school in the report, thousands of schools, against standardized top quartile targets. It was good performance, not best performance. And across all of these schools, we can see there's potential just from going to where we are to operating things well for a 25% reduction in electricity, a 37% reduction in gas, $109 million a year in utility costs, and the big number for us, almost 250,000 tons a year of greenhouse gas emissions. That right-hand number, of course, the dollars matter. Of course, the energy matters. We're in the middle of an energy, or the beginning of an energy transition. But those tons of greenhouse gas emissions that we should care about, we believe and are arguing that that emissions reduction can happen by 2030. That changes the game. So our exhortation to everybody on the call today is we all have a role to play. Let's play that role. Let's commit to a 36% reduction in emissions by 2030. Next slide, please. And we're very conscious. We talk to school boards on a daily, weekly basis. We're very conscious of the challenge you face, perhaps more of a challenge overall than any other building sector. You've got a large number of buildings of every kind you can imagine and every condition. There's been a history of underinvestment in building renewal, so the physical condition is often suspect and in need of help. Many of you cover long distances to get to your schools. Budget limitations are important. Lack of people to attend to the work that has to be done to improve efficiency is perhaps an even bigger issue. We're still coming out of the pandemic. We've still got residual effects in terms of operating guidance that people are asking questions on where are we today? We heard a lot from the government. We heard a lot from ASHRAE about how we should be running our buildings during, not so much about what have we learned. Is it time to start being more focused in the strategies we deploy? Everybody wants healthy schools, no question about it. But does that, as you saw on the previous chart, does that have to come at the expense of greenhouse gas emissions and climate change? You're facing tremendous uncertainties. There's political uncertainties, there's technology uncertainties. The energy transition means you're going to be moving away from natural gas boilers, for example, to heat pumps, to to new electrification technology. What does that look like? Who's going to pay for it? When is that going to happen? And a lot of what Sustainable Schools is focused on, you generally lack sufficient good data and information to be able to make consistently good choices when you're already so busy keeping schools and school boards operational. So we don't underestimate the challenge. And forgive me for repeating myself, the planet doesn't care. Um, we've declared war on the planet. It didn't intend it, but it's fighting back, and we are in trouble. We are in difficulty. We have to find a way to respond to that challenge. Next slide, please. So strategic energy management sounds horribly clinical, doesn't it? It sounds like something you read a textbook about, but in fact, it's kind of a new direction for energy management, energy efficiency focus that recognizes the importance of organizational response, of management practices, that says we can't get there looking at one building at a time, doing an energy retrofit or an infrastructure renewal, trying to do it in an energy efficient fashion. We can't get through the tens of thousands of buildings across school buildings across North America, one building at a time, or even 5 buildings at a time. We got to look at whole portfolios. And strategic energy management says, how do we look at all those challenges, the geographic distances, the number of buildings, the differences between the buildings, the political factors, locally and provincially and federally? How do we look at all those in a strategic sense and align our organization around tackling this beast called greenhouse gas emissions and climate change? I frankly love the 4 boards that stepped up. We've got the biggest board in Canada, in the Toronto District School Board. We've got a couple of fairly small boards. I'll come to the profiles of these boards in just a moment. We've got Simcoe County with such a long history and one of the most improved school boards in Canada over that period of time. So thanks to them 2 years ago for stepping up and being part of this project and being willing to spend more time with us now and to be part of our panel coming up later in this conversation this morning around that. So those are our boards. The first phase of this project, as Caroline mentioned, 22-23, and there was a webinar you'll see there on December the 6th. 21 school boards attended that event. The guide was released in early 2023. I believe the webinar recording from that is also available on our website. But phase 1 was all about looking at these schools that had these jumps in energy use from one year to the next that nobody understood, and trying to figure out what were the operational, what were the system, what went wrong. And I'll admit early on with this, the results are not conclusive. But what it drew us into was the bigger question of boards' management practices, organizational response to energy efficiency, how the different boards are treating it, and what we'll share in just a moment, a pretty specific, if you like, process for consideration by boards as to how do you manage from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to step 4 to getting all of your schools under control, getting them all to a good standard of energy efficiency and then keeping them there over time. So that was the original project. We'll show you at very high level some of those results. Phase 2 has really revealed that the work that was done back there didn't stick. And again, we really appreciate the interviews, the conversations we've had with all of the boards and with the industry players, with QMC and SetPoint. Everybody's been very generous with their time and very thoughtful about what do we actually need, again, to move the needle, bend the curve, get things going in the right direction. Our intention is to post the updated guide this month before the holidays. So, and today, as you can see, December the 5th is the open webinar. So once again, thank you all for being here. We'll share a little bit of what came before, but we're far more interested in what's happening going forward. The next slide, please. And this, allow me, if you would, to maybe a little pedantically walk through this, because a lot of thought has gone into this process as to what is a systematic way of tackling this, not just trying to be more energy efficient when we have to do infrastructure renewal projects anyway, not just doing a retrofit here or a recommissioning project there, but what is a systematic approach process where over time you can take you can first prioritize your schools, which are the biggest opportunities, and then move them progressively through to that final stage of performance verification. Say, yeah, we got there, we've met the target. How do we get all of the schools done between now and 2030? So the first part of that is data, and we'll come back to this with the panel later. So first, how do you manage the energy data across your whole portfolio? Calgary, you've got Energy Star Portfolio Manager that I believe you work with the city of Calgary on. In Ontario, we're fortunate to have a utility consumption database. It is a complete and fairly up-to-date record of energy use over a number of years for the schools. We'll hear later some of you are purchasing energy management software, so-called EMIS. But managing data, having good access to data is step one. Without that, we truly believe that if you can't make good use of data, extract all the meaning you can out of the data that are available to you, we're lost. We can't manage the thousands of schools without using data to help set priorities, point us in the right direction. So begins with data. We're going to talk some more about that. But the data itself, that's not meaningful. It's what comes out of it. It's the reporting. So benchmarking Sustainable Schools provides benchmarking. It tells, in Ontario, it tells with actually all of the school boards that provide data to us one way or another. The benchmarking happens. You can see which are your high potential schools, the ones that are already pretty efficient. You can see how you rank relative to other school boards, which is found to be motivational. You can see how much savings potential you have, which makes the business case for action. And importantly, then you can see actual savings that materialize over time. So is the work that you're doing, is it having success? So the reporting is really important. We'll hear from the panel on how they're approaching that. Priority schools, where you've got top performers, it's good to tell them. Recognition helps. People like good news, but also get standards. What makes them different? What are the system metrics? What are the energy metrics? What are the board standards you can develop from your top performers? And finding the high savings potential schools. These are the ones, the 25% of your schools that have the lion's share of the savings potential. Pareto principle absolutely works here. And those go through into particularly HVAC investigation. The HVAC systems in your schools drive most of the energy use and almost all of the emissions, again, especially in provinces with a fairly clean grid. We'll talk a little bit about more in-depth energy analysis and what's happening with some of the boards in Ontario that are working with Enbridge on the Pay for Performance program, where interval gas data are revealing all kinds of useful insights about where the opportunities are and how to tackle them. Building automation system is key. We're going to dig into that in detail. You cannot manage large portfolios of relatively complex buildings without good visibility through the building automation system. And HVAC testing, we still find almost no boards are doing HVAC testing for reasons of identifying energy efficiency opportunities. And I think we've documented effectively, as have a couple of boards, it is the entry point. It's the starting point of understanding why schools use as much energy as they do. It's the imbalances, it's the deficiencies within hydronic and air handling systems that are driving those big numbers, those high users at the bottom. Then we get to action. There's operational improvements, there's retrofits, there's electrical work as well, variable frequency drives and lighting retrofits, and performance verification. You have to close the loop. So who is charged with looking at the numbers through the energy use and through the building automation as to how things are operating to make sure that the intended effects have actually taken place. So again, forgive the length of time to work through this, but we can document well now boards that are following this process. One, the process has been validated by some of the most successful boards that are among the most efficient, and following this process gets you where you need to go. And therefore, we just got to figure out, how do we resource this? How do we put it into place? How do we get everybody involved? So this, love it if everybody would print this off and hang it on the wall and put little pins in as to where your different schools are working their way through here, because we believe this is the strategic energy management pathway to getting to where we need to be in 2030. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to spend any time on this because there's no surprises here. Going through the first part of the project in 2022, we found all those schools that had these unexpected jumps in energy use, and I would suggest that every board on this call, you have jumps in energy use from year to year, much of which you can't explain, and they hold the secret to how to achieve better numbers going forward. And we dug into them through the building automation system, through talking to the individual school boards. And you can see in terms of electricity use, there are no surprises there. You can find these things easily through your own building automation. You can correct them. And when you correct them, the numbers will fall into place. Next slide, please. Same with natural gas. And guess what? Observation number one is just like electricity number one. Fan schedules, the fans are just operating longer than they need to be. And over time, things get into disarray. People override things. We find fans running in the middle of the night, sometimes to heat up the building and sometimes just because of overrides. So you can see all of the issues there. The CO2 levels really matter. We need to monitor those and keep them within the ranges that ASHRAE has recommended. Item 7 here is probably the biggest single thing we find on gas, which is if we've got imbalances between supply, return, and exhaust airflows, it doesn't matter what you do with your control dampers, you can't manage outside air volumes, and that's the biggest single factor that's driving excessive gas consumption in these schools. So we know what to do. I think every board on this call, they won't see anything here, oh, that's a new idea. They'll recognize this. So how do you implement it in a systematic, strategic way? Next slide, please. So again, I'm not going to spend much time on this. The answer is it was inconclusive, but this is an interesting way for you to potentially summarize, because it's easy to manage data. That's what Excel was invented for. Summarize how your schools are going. So here we've got a group of schools from different school boards. You can see the first column there is the school board, and they're anonymous, so it's number 1, 2, 3, 4. The baseline year for energy use, you can all find that with the data that you've got. And those next columns, there are targets. So the ones with big target savings, like you can see with electricity, board 2, school 7 is 54%. It's using twice as much electricity, having adjusted for variables like portable classrooms and heating system type, twice as much electricity as it should. And we can translate that into kilowatt hours. Similarly with gas, that same Wicked School is using a 63%. It's using 63% savings, more than twice as much gas as it should be. So the data you can find by simply comparing actual consumption to good practice metrics, which we publish every year in the Sustainable Schools Report, you can figure out which are the most efficient. The ones with reds in both electricity, reds and oranges, those are your high savings potential. So the rest of this is what happened in phase 1. And essentially, we looked a year before the workshop that we had with each board and a year after. And we looked at it for electricity on the left and for natural gas on the right. And again, without dwelling on it, where we see the red arrows pointing down, in those, the energy actually went up, not down, compared to a year previous. And you can see there's about the same number went down as went up. Same on the natural gas. There's a few more where they made improvements, but still arrows going in the wrong direction. The next slide, please. And here's the rest of them, and it's a continuation of the same story. So overall, modest improvements came out of that 2022 work, but nothing like to the potential and not to the satisfaction of the 4 boards taking part. So this year has been all about, let's talk about what worked, what didn't work, what went right, what went wrong, and the panel discussion will try to explore some of the key areas that came out of it. Some parts of that process flow diagram are working fairly well, and other parts we barely started work yet. So, but the beginning of this project essentially showed us that just having a good process that everybody agrees to isn't sufficient to get things moving. Next slide, please. So lessons learned really go within each of the big boxes there, and you can read them yourself. Different boards have different practices about managing the whole portfolio utility data. Sustainable schools reporting or your own analytics can tell you where the high potential buildings are that can help you make the case, the business case for action, because it requires resources and sometimes it requires funds. We explored the organizational response when energy use goes up does the information find its way to the maintenance department so they're directed out to go and do what has to be done, figure out what went wrong and fix it in a timely manner. Again, building automation is fundamental. You cannot manage large school portfolios without good building automation systems, and you probably can't afford to bring them up to date immediately. But over time, it should be part of your budgeting plan that you're upgrading, getting rid of pneumatic controls, implementing upgraded building automation and operating sequences going forward. The next slide, please. Sub-metering. Once you've made all the use you can of central metering, we're great believers. We see very little sub-metering happening except in some parts of Canada with new schools. Once you've exhausted what you can reasonably extract from monthly and interval data, you're going to want to know with a bit more discrimination where the energy goes. We were very happy to have QMC part of this project, who've been keeping us up to date with what are the trends. Certainly in other building types, sub-metering is expanding rapidly, and it's giving us even better insight into where the opportunities are. We'll come back to HVAC testing. You absolutely have to know how much air and how much water you're moving around your buildings to even make a start on making improvements. And internal capacity is a big issue. What kind of internal resources and what kind of external resources, service contractors, your favorite consultants, are they sufficient? Are they well enough informed to be able to make meaningful contributions to getting your whole school board, the whole portfolio to where it needs to be? So this really was the end of the current guide. It's lessons learned. These we're expanding upon and updating in the new version. Next slide, please. So let's, and I promised that we would try to keep as much of the time on this as we could available for this discussion. This is where Q&A comes big time into play. Please don't put your questions in the chat because we're not monitoring those for questions. So as this conversation works out, please post your Q&A, as Carolyn mentioned. If the question fits within what we're looking at right now, then we will, Carolyn is very good at interrupting me and we'll fold it into the conversation with our panelists. But if we don't get to it during the webinar, we will issue a formal Q&A document to all attendees after the fact that looks to respond as fully as we can to those questions. Let me give you a bit of an introduction first to the school boards. Our industry friend, Setpoint, wasn't able to to join us today, and I regret that because they've been active participants in a lot of this work. But the four school boards, and for me, this is the dream team in terms of boards. The four boards together represent 718 schools, about 7% of all the boards of all the schools in Ontario. Um, they with rankings, we have one of the top performing school boards in the Conseil scolaire catholique du Nouvel-Ontario, which is ranked number 3 out of 72 boards in the province. We got the most improved board here with Simcoe County School Board, which improved from 18 rank of 18 to 10 in the last report. We got some school boards which are really good on electricity and not so much on gas, and we got boards which are really good on gas and not on electricity. So, for example, Toronto District School Board has significant gas savings potential, and we'll hear more from Maurice about how they're tackling that. So what more to say about the boards? So we've got two smallish boards in Simcoe County. We've got a mid-sized board, and in Toronto District School Board with 546 schools, they're the biggest overall. Oh yeah, we should probably add between them, they have the potential for 62,000 tons. We talked about 250,000 tons. These four boards between them, obviously with TDSB being the biggest share, have 62,000 of those tons as of 21-22 school year. So let me also kind of introduce QMC. I've touched on this already. In the early going, we can make a lot of progress with monthly billing data, with annual data, which is what we get through the BPS, with monthly data that you have in the utility consumption database and Energy Star Portfolio Manager. But as we get deeper into this, we're going to want more detailed information about what goes where, especially as we step into electrification, where we'll have new air source heat pumps, perhaps ground source heat pumps, new heat recovery equipment. We're going to want better metering. Peter's been great working with us in different building sectors. Hospitals are more complex. They're a long way ahead of this. But ASHRAE 90.1 and the National Building Code do expect to see metering in at least new schools, sub-metering. So we expect to see more of this data, and you'll see over the coming years, we'll be folding that more granular information into these conversations. So again, the more use we can make of data, the better we can progress. So welcome to Morley from Brent Holdman, Norfolk, Jacob from Simcoe County, Maurice from Toronto District, and Michel Seguin from the Conseil scolaire catholique du Nouvel-Ontario, and to Peter with QMC. And again, remind you, Setpoint's also been an active player on this, but not available today. So if
Ian,
I
if I
may,
may just jump in before you
yes,
get
please,
started
Carol.
there. It
Yeah.
looks like Peter wasn't able to join us, so it's going to be Kwesi from QMC.
Okay.
And then we do have a question that popped in the Q&A before we get started,
Yep.
asking, are there federal grants to kickstart some of the initiatives? We got provincial grant to do tab on all of our schools, but no funding to do anything about the deficiencies list, which is very long.
Yeah, so the provincial funding was through COVID. Obviously, the education is a provincial responsibility. Federal government has been good. The answer is uncertain times, and there's no specific funding except through utility companies that we're aware of right now. What the federal government, the next election is going to bring, who knows? Again, it goes back to the original slide. At the end of the day, we got to go back to doing what we can do. A lot of it is operational, but you're right, funding is going to be needed. But that we're not where we need to be right now, and as the climate situation deteriorates and public gets more and more agitated about it, we can expect this world to be quite dynamic over the coming years. But let's step in. I want to, so this is if you like, a summary of the flow chart we showed you previously. I want to talk about data. No surprise. So that's the top three of those boxes and the energy analysis piece in HVAC. I want to talk about building automation systems and how these four boards, the condition or the status, if you like, of their BAS installations. I want to talk about HVAC testing. I want to talk about action in terms of operational improvements and energy retrofits. And I want to talk about performance verification. And as a heads up to all the panelists, I'm going to leave time at the end where I'd love to have your closing thoughts. You know, you're all deeply involved with this. You've got very different experiences and the strengths and weaknesses in every board. I'm going to ask each of you for a kind of a 2-minute summary of what would your advice be to us at Sustainable Schools and to everybody else on this call. How do you get started with this? What are your big success stories? What are your challenges? How do we collaborate? How do we collectively move forward on this agenda? So as I say, the closing thoughts, I'm going to try to leave 10 minutes at the end for everybody to contribute to this. But I want to run through Molay and Michelle, in fact, all four of you around management of utility data. I think, if I recall, two of you make good use of the utility consumption database, the Ministry of Education's database. And Molay, I'm going to start with you in just a moment, but I think the BPS reporting you have in Ontario and Jacob, Simcoe counties, bringing in Energy Cap as software. But Molay, can you give us a quick overview of how do you manage data or how do you use it?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Molay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ian, for bringing that up. So yeah, like I said last time, so the way how we use here, so to start, like all of our school is on BAS control. So I'm the one who control even though like for the scheduling, like for tracking all those energy deficiency. And we have all of our school on BAS, but the main thing we do is to work with the utility consumption data.
Yep.
And the BPS as well. So you know the yearly like energy consumption that you have to analyze, and also based on that using UCD data. So we also use the ranking. You know the school we have almost like a 35 facilities,
Yep.
buildings. So I have to go like through like every single school, like based on the electricity consumption, gas, even though like water consumption. And we have implemented like some submeter, like a electricity side, not for the gas yet, and not for I think for water as well. Yeah, we do have that. And then based on that ranking, we have to analyze and then make our 5 years internally, like a 5 years, you know, plan management. So
So
on
you
the
so you're finding that the utility consumption database is really useful in that way. Michelle, can
it is
you pick that up? Because I think you're also making use, and I think you also made the suggestion it would be helpful if somebody could monitor all of the UCD data and flag the boards as to when things are happening. But you're also a UCD kind of person, right? Michelle.
Can't hear you, Michelle.
We've lost contact.
Looked like he was trying to, reestablish the audio.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear
Yes,
you
we
now.
can, Michelle. Whew.
Okay, sorry about that.
Magic moment. Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of UCD, yes, we rely on it. We make sure once a year when we have to input the alternative fuels, we spend quite a bit of time making sure that all the natural gas, all the electricity has come in for all of the accounts. We make sure that we put in all the propane, all the oil. We also do the water, so that we can prepare that for the ministry report that's due by July 1st of every year. So we use that report to rank the schools, and then we go into VFA that will establish priorities for projects that we want to do. So yes, it's very useful for me, the UCD database.
Maurice, let's move on. You have a full interval metering system where I think most or all of your schools are connected up to continuous reporting of data. How is your team able to use interval data, like 15-minute and hourly electricity and gas data to point you in the right direction?
Yes, so you're correct. We're fortunate that we have about 80% of our schools with interval data capability. So that is just a huge advantage because, as you mentioned, we can identify how much consumption is occurring during different times of the day and times of the week, and that's really helped us pinpoint the likely cause of issues at the schools. So we've been able to use that information in targeting schools for specific measures, because before we want to go in to do a project, and doing a project at a school, whether it's enhancing the BAS or putting in new controls, very time consuming. A lot of effort has to go into that. So we'd like to identify, is it a maintenance issue? Is it an operational issue that's causing this high consumption? Because if we can pinpoint that, that can be solved relatively quickly, and we don't have to go through the entire exercise of doing a deep analysis at that school. So that's where the interval data has really helped us. And I'm jumping ahead to P4P, but if you have a chance to talk about so-called heat maps, which really means gas intensity, the equivalent kilowatt hours per square foot during different time periods. And in working with Enerlife, we've seen that, and that's been very helpful. So we've mimicked that in our own analysis, and so we're using that again to identify when is this high gas consumption occurring, and that's the advantage of having access to interval data.
Right. And quasi QMC metering, sub-metering. So again, we're not seeing much yet, but we expect to. And I think most of what's happening with school boards is at the whole building level. It's the main electric, the main gas meter. But can you give us a quick overview nationally? What does ASHRAE 90.1 say about metering for new, which is the reference for the energy code? I don't believe there's anything in the Ontario building code right now, but when new buildings are going up, I think you referred to BC previously. What are you seeing in terms of specification of sub-metering that gets us more granular in new buildings or existing buildings?
I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Kwasi. Thank you.
Perfect. I had to work in the background there to get myself unmuted. In the last time we spoke, I just wanted, what Peter went over is that we're seeing a lot of this in new buildings and retrofits. Where QMC ties in is allowing you to find that, to accumulate that granular data so that you can make decisions in real time. Where we are right now is likely because when at the end of the year, when you're doing your reporting, you see this tremendous use of the utilities, whether it's natural gas, water, or electricity. But what our platform allows you to do is take a more granular look at everything, across the spectrum. And we're doing a really good job so far in BC. We've started to work with the school boards here in Ontario, but really we're just at the cusp of really getting started. We're getting more inquiries daily. I'm participating in more panels like this every single month. The word is getting out, and at some point everybody's going to have to get on board with having some sort of measure of their utilities.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Let's so we need to get data organized. That's kind of the starting point, and the bigger the board, the bigger the challenge with that, but the bigger the opportunity as well. Let's move on to the whole building automation system area there. And my understanding, I just confirmed this, is that 3 of the 4 boards here are now fully DDC. The pneumatics are all gone. I know that's the case with Simcoe County. Morlaix and Michelle, that's also the case. I think you both your boards have full DDC across the system.
That is correct.
Okay, and Maurice, will allow you to be envious for just a moment. What are you seeing with, and what are your plans around upgrading the building automation system and over time getting the pneumatics out of there?
So we've got the BAS in virtually all our buildings. The degree of automation, though, varies from building to building. We do have some newer buildings that are full DDC, and that's great because in a building like that, there should be no reason you cannot control things very accurately. In theory, there's always issues, right, that actually come up. But unfortunately, we have many buildings that are still using pneumatic controls for zone temperature control. And that's a big problem. We don't have enough technicians who understand pneumatics to be able to service the equipment. It's leaking, it's inoperative, and we have a multi-billion-dollar repair backlog that causes us issues. So that's resulting in a lot of overheating in our schools because, as everyone knows, unfortunately, pneumatics are designed to fail to full heat. Mm-hmm. And they're working great in that regard. They're failing to full heat in many cases. So our long-term plan is to get in there and replace pneumatics wherever possible. The challenge, those are very intensive projects. And especially when you have abatement issues as well in older buildings, yep, they become expensive projects. So that's something that we're going to have to deal with over the next many years.
And the use, what we're seeing with the pay for performance project with, I guess with 9 boards now, is scheduling is the biggest, you're the first big opportunity. Those double-digit savings are almost entirely attributable to switching things off when they're not supposed to be running. Michelle, I need to keep reminding everybody, you're ranked number 3 out of 72 boards, so you're one of the most energy efficient boards in Ontario. And I think you commented you owe your success, as they say at the Oscars, to your building automation system. Can you talk a bit about how you manage scheduling for your board, which is spread over, I think, very large distances?
Yes, so we have building automation systems in all of our school except one, which is going to close next year. So, 11 years ago, I had the good fortune of hiring a seasoned BAS technician, and he went through all our buildings over these years, that and with some contract work as well, when we're doing HVAC or whatever, and we control the heating systems, the HVAC systems, sensors in pretty much every room except for some schools where we're still working on it. Scheduling is the key. Turn off everything when you don't need it. Set back everywhere you can. And our technician that I'm talking about, he's retiring in January, but we have a second one coming. He's been with him for 1.5 years now, so we're hoping we can continue on this. but definitely scheduling controls, indoor, outdoors. Make sure the heat AC doesn't fight the heat or vice versa. For us, BAS is the key.
And just again, at risk of repetition, reminding everybody this is the number 3 ranked school board in Ontario. So we listen very carefully to you, Michelle, because whatever you're doing has got to be good. It's and Morley, let's touch on this a bit. So building automation, it can do a lot of things, right? We're always interested in trend logs, where you can actually go see what systems are doing. Some of the data we presented from the first phase of this project was going online and pulling down trend logs and finding surprising things running when they shouldn't be. And I think you'd referred, Morley, to a front-end upgrade that didn't necessarily go the way that you would have hoped. Can you give us a bit of background about how do you use your building automation system to manage all the schools at Brant, Hold'em, and Norfolk?
Yeah, we basically have a Michelle said, if you don't need it, it goes off, right?
Yep.
It's based on the school occupancy schedule. We have a school occupancy schedule, and then we also have like a community use in our school. So you have to take all those parameters in the equation, right?
Yep.
So adding the community use, that's gonna be like a giving. I mean, like it's gonna be like a consuming a lot of energy, right? Um, so yeah, from Monday to Friday, we have a schedule like from let's say for example from 7 to 3 p.m. everything goes off. We don't need it. And then during the winter time, you have your heating load in the building, right?
Yep.
So that means that can keep the school heated, like even though the custodian's gonna be coming back, uh, for cleaning, they have a certain amount of heating load inside the building.
So do many of
So
your schools, Morley, have perimeter heating as well that keeps the buildings warm during the night?
okay, so during the night for the setback, we have a setback schedule like that's gonna be probably like a 15 or 16.
Yep.
When the temperature goes below that temperature, so the unit's gonna come up automatically, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Helpful. And remind me, or maybe I got the story wrong. I think you had a front end. I think you got one supplier for all of your building automation systems, which makes life easier.
That
But
is
could you tell
correct.
us the story
Yes.
about the upgrade that you lost some of your programming?
Well, we do have, okay, we have, to respond to your question, we have one supplier for the building automation system. But we have a backup. We have a backup data, even though everything's gonna be a loose, but we have some, we can always trace those data and then re-upload it.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Just
Let's
to
so
jump in there, Ian, we have
yes,
another
please.
question from the Q&A. They ask, how do school boards address ventilation requirements for caretakers during off-school hours, i.e. after 4 p.m.?
Jacob, do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, I'd be happy to actually. We do provide mostly heat. I'll be honest with you, I'm in the process right now of trying to start a program where we actually have our regional operations supervisors provide us with like a detail of the night runs for our custodians, because all our buildings are usually open till about 10 p.m. unless they're like a small rural school. So if we can get that implemented, the amount of electricity, not to mention, leakage from rooftop units, even air handlers that even have just a small opening in a damper just to shut them down will save us a fortune. So it's something that in the past I think they've tried to implement and it didn't really work out for them. Now that we have a building automation assistant, we have more people able to make some schedule changes. Obviously, it's a little much just for one person to try and do that, especially if they change the runs regularly. But for the most part, I've noticed our programs, if we do schedule off, say, an air handler and there is perimeter heating, the perimeter heating mostly will still keep the set point in the room until the security status changes to armed.
Okay. And Maurice, I know TDSB's done a lot of consultation with unions and different stakeholders. What's the situation there about evening operation for when caretakers are still working in the school?
Yeah, that's a good question for sure, because it's a big challenge for us that we're still working out. But like Jacob mentioned, what we're trying to communicate to caretakers is that the occupant load changes dramatically, right, from the school day to when you have a skeleton staff in the building. So running ventilation equipment sized for full load capacity for 2% of the occupants doesn't really make sense. So what we're trying to do on an interim basis is keep exhaust fans running in the building, because every building has sanitary exhaust, general exhaust, with the idea that ventilation through infiltration should be sufficient to deal with that very, very low occupant load. So that's what we're trying to do. I mean, ultimately, we are moving towards a demand control ventilation. So having CO2 sensors in various points of the school, number of zones, but we're not there yet, obviously, because that involves projects to put in new sensors. So that's what we're doing for the time being. And generally speaking, we're getting a fair degree of cooperation.
That's great. Yeah, and somehow climate change is a big unifier, isn't it? We're all in this suit together. We've all got our part to play, and as long as we're respectful and explain things clearly, that certainly goes. And people are always amazed by just how large the energy cost is for running the HVAC system for one extra hour. Just 1 hour, just how much that costs. So let's move on for.
Sorry, Ian, can I just add one point, because I forgot.
Yeah.
Jacob mentioned something very important, that fan systems either ventilate or they can heat and ventilate. But often in schools, typically the heating load is often, if it's hot water heated, done by perimeter radiators. So you don't necessarily need to run many air handlers, okay, to keep the building warm. So what we're trying to do also is identify for caretakers, because often it's not clear to them, that's a heating air handler, that's a ventilating only air handler.
Okay.
So with the ventilating only, you have some discretion available to you.
So education matters. Imagine that in a school system. Gotta love it. It's that's very helpful. And when you are running air handling units just in a heating mode in the middle of the night to maintain set point, just making sure the outside air dampers are shut really tight. Let's do some weather stripping, like keep the outside air off. You don't want to be heating the great outdoors as well as the time you're heating the school. Let's touch on to HVAC testing. And I think just about every board on this call today has a big opportunity here. So the big idea, and there's a couple of the boards on this call that have experience here, but the big idea here is if you haven't measured the supply, return, and exhaust for the major exhaust fans recently, you can be certain that almost all of them are out of balance. They're not what they used to be. Generally, supply fans lose capacity faster than return fans do. And if there's an imbalance between supply and return in particular, you can do what you like. You can set your outside air dampers, your mixed air dampers, wherever you like. It won't make any difference because the air simply isn't there to pull from. So the need, starting with your high potential schools, to bring in a tab contractor that you trust, that actually does reliable work, measures things accurately, to look school by school, how much air are we blowing in and how much are we taking out? And we have a good specification for doing that work. And if they're not in balance, rebalancing them, which usually is a good chance to put variable frequency drives in, because it's much easier to get the balance right with VFDs than with fixtures, but that testing, similarly with hydronic systems, if you haven't got the flow you think you've got, if you've got a very low delta T between supply and return on a perimeter heating system or a glycol system, you're pumping too much, it's costing you energy, and it's very hard to control. That system testing we see is always done for renovations, is always done with new schools, because you've got to set them up. But it should be done for energy efficiency purposes. Find your high savings, your energy intensive schools, test the HVAC systems. You'll find a remarkable range of deficiencies that can be corrected. So, Jacob, it may be before your time, but back in the day when there used to be carbon funding last time around with a previous provincial government, Simcoe County did a lot of that work. I think about 22 of your schools, and had some quite remarkable results. Were you there at that time? I can't remember.
Are you talking about when Kathleen Wynne was in?
Yes.
Yeah, I've been here about 8 years, so
okay.
I was definitely here for that.
So, and that featured a lot of testing, I know, because we used the reports for a lot of our educational work that coming through there. And as I say, we can recall the electricity savings, like the fan power savings, were even more dramatic than the gas savings in those schools. And Maurice, you're looking at this now as well as part of your big program going forward with Toronto District.
Yeah, we are, and we're trying to again use the energy data, gas consumption data, to try to identify where likely this would benefit us most. So if we feel that we're over ventilating, and so we would be looking at is occupied intensity, right? Because that's when our fan systems are running, and compare that to other schools. So if we see a school that has a very high gas intensity during occupied hours, we'd have to ask the question why. And if we're not overheating the school, then ventilation is a good place to look at. So again, we're trying to use that data so that we don't send people out to do balancing maybe or testing where it's not required.
It's all about bang for the buck and bang for the hours of resources you got available, because nobody has enough time. But again, for everybody on the call, we really commend looking into, and happy to get calls from everybody anytime, talking about tab contractors, your new best friends. Make sure you've got a small stable of contractors you trust that can work with you on a go-forward basis. And a bit like Maurice's work to, over time, replace pneumatic controls, this is something that you should plan over the next 5 years to work your way through all your schools. Again, starting with the ones that have the highest intensity, the biggest opportunity. Maurice, let me keep you on the call for a moment. So let's get into action. You talked about heat maps a moment ago. So all of the schools in the bottom part of that benchmark chart we looked at in the beginning, all the high intensity schools, the biggest reason is operational differences. It's nothing to do with building envelopes or boiler efficiency. It's all to do with how things are run. So can you give a bit of an overview of your experience so far with what you're doing generally, but also pay for performance, and what exactly the heat maps are, how your team is using them, and how you're finding you were one of those, I'll fess up, one of those double-digit saving boards that we looked at a moment ago.
Yes, we were very pleased with the results from the first year of the Pay for Performance program. We were especially pleased because we really didn't do that much at those schools from our point of view, except go in and get a handle on scheduling, which was a big problem. And again, for our board, I know we might be different from other boards. Our caretakers are responsible for doing the scheduling at their schools. And so depending on where you go, good, bad, not so good. And so I think we had a number of schools here that were in the not so good category, and we've shifted them over to a better category. And so it's really amazing what scheduling alone can do. And this corresponds nicely with another program we're doing where we're trying to get through improving scheduling at schools in one part of our board. And so we're seeing about a 9% savings in gas and electrical consumption just from getting a handle on schedules. Not
And
running.
this is across multiple schools, right?
Yes, many schools. We're talking 100 plus schools. So scheduling, from my perspective, is the first wave of the attack, let's say. And then once you get that done, you analyze the data again and you identify where you still have issues. And we have schools like that even though you schedule correctly, you're still consuming, let's say, high gas. And then you investigate those and you identify, okay, we have a number of maintenance concerns going on here. Stuff's not working. So then we try to zero in and deal with those issues.
And Jacob, likewise, Simcoe County was the top saving school board in the first cohort in terms of percentage across the whole group of schools. Can you share a bit of your experience on that?
I could talk all day if you really want me to. Scheduling is always a large part of it for us. We actually took away all of the scheduling. We don't give any caretakers much play at all with the bass anymore. We took away scheduling and permits and whatnot and do it ourselves now. It does take some time out of our week, obviously, but my predecessor said the first year they saved almost $1 million just from schedules being left on. Even I do it myself. So I do have a plan that biannually I want to actually go in and reset every schedule in every school just to guarantee that nobody's missed anything. Because no matter what you do, like if we do, I say a gym permit, I'm turning on change room exhaust fans, washroom exhaust fans, corridor heat, possibly. All these things, like the next week, if you're not on it, you could actually miss out and leave it for the whole rest of the year if there's not another permit similar to it. So,
and that $1 million is across 105 schools, right?
That's correct.
Wow.
So obviously it's a little bit of work for me right now without an assistant, but if you're going to pay somebody, less than $80,000 to do the permits, the numbers line up pretty quickly, don't they?
Or less than $1 million a year.
Yeah, and obviously that's only one day for them to do this stuff. So I'll probably end up splitting them 50-50 with an assistant. So it's only half a day on a Monday each, and we're saving that much money.
So this is really helpful. And again, I think people understand sustainable schools. All of these stories and experiences are linked to these boards have demonstrated real savings already. They're either top performers or they've had big percentage savings. So what they're describing has the results. It has the outcomes for it. So and that's how we generally choose our panelists. Let's talk about energy retrofits for a moment. Morlaye, you're finally getting to the lighting retrofits. So you said that was one of the big pieces you had left. How have you made the business case for doing some of these, if you like, capital projects?
For the capital project for that, so we have internally, like I said, a 5 years plan, like internally, like we have plan to do a lighting retrofit, like for most of the school. That's coming like 2026, 2027.
Yep.
That's the biggest piece for us, like right now on the table. So we are trying to implement that. But other than that, so we have invest like ton of money, like for the HVAC systems. But for the lighting, no. We are working on it, and then we are trying to do our best to implement like in each of our school, like for before 2020, 29. Yeah, the deadline.
And so typically what you've done with the HVAC, has that generally been associated with renewal projects?
Yes.
But with lighting, it's a standalone, right? You don't have to replace the lighting, or I guess sometime you do because fluorescent will not be there. But so with discretionary investment like that, how did the board deal with putting that kind of money up to make the lighting? How did you make the business case to do that project for the lighting?
Oh, for the lighting, like we're gonna be like in holding, because like I said, we have invested a lot of money on the HVAC system.
Yeah.
So we don't have to invest any money ahead, in the 2 or 3 years ahead coming. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna be going selecting maybe probably 10 schools for the lighting project. We're gonna go by school, like a portion. We're gonna take some portion of the school. Maybe probably we're gonna take 5 school next in 2026, and then we're gonna invest a lot of money there. Um, this is how we're gonna be working on that. I don't know if that's responded to your question.
So I just want to push a little bit hard because everybody's challenged with no board has enough money to do the things it has to do.
Yes.
How did your CFO and the trustees deal with carving out some money that has environmental benefits, has a payback? How did you make that case that we got to do this? And how did they come to approve the money when there's so many other things that are competing for that cash?
Okay, so this is something I did in my previous school board. So I did the audit retrofit for the lighting. So in terms of a return of investment, so the return of investment of the lighting is very quick. It's about a 2 and 3 years, and then you have your return of investment, like investing in the LED, right? So this is I'm going to presenting to this trustee actually for the next year. So we're gonna be presenting that. This is what we have to do. When we do that, we have to get this, in terms of saving. This is what we're spending right now without LED. And then this is what if we implemented a LED lighting, this is what we have to save. So I'm hoping that's gonna be working, and then it's gonna be approved from the trustee. So yeah.
That is that helps a lot because there's always that competition for funds, right?
Yeah.
So, Carolyn, are there any other questions that have?
Yeah, we do have one question here from Stephanie Foster, and I think Michelle agreed to answer it live here. So they were asking, are any schools using the Ontario Green Button program to download energy data directly from utilities?
I didn't know. I just wanted to write our board does not use it, but then
Okay.
so no, our board I looked a bit into it, but it's interesting. I should look more into it. Maybe there's more savings there to be had with that.
Well, we'll keep you informed. It's provincial regulation that came into effect November the 1st of 2023 that requires all distributors, electric and gas, to make data readily available. It's still going through some teething pains, and we'll let everybody know when Green Button's fully available, but it will likely, Michelle, continue to feed the utility consumption database. So it'll be easier for Karen Carter, perhaps not so much for you guys, but Green Button is having some teething pains, Stephanie, that we're working on with Enbridge and a couple of the big electric utilities right now. The last box in here really closes. So we began with data. The last box ends with data, and we've really covered this. So I'm going to skip in just a moment. But the idea that if you make improvements, whether they're physical retrofits or they're operational improvements, you've got to track the savings. You can do it on monthly billing data. You can use the utility consumption database. You can use Energy Star. You can use sustainable schools reporting, a number of ways. But if you can't see the savings at the meter, they didn't happen. So the energy savings, and with good building automation system, just verifying the fact periodically that you can see the equipment starting at the right time, stopping at the right time. You can see that you've got the right space temperatures at different times of day. This need, and we've never got time, right? We can hardly find the time to make the improvements. The idea of then spending more time to verify the fact that they work, but it's absolutely fundamentally necessary. And with good data and good building automation systems, it becomes part of this roadmap, if you like, to 2030, that we got to get those bookends, choosing the right schools and the right measures to begin with, and the other bookend, making sure that thing works as intended. Then we keep rolling through all the schools. I'm going to pick up on the promise I made at the beginning, and once again, I'm going to start with you, Mole, if I could. We got like 7 minutes left, and Kwesi, forgive me, Will. I think we got a good feeling on sub-metering. I really back from the boards on everything we've talked about today. Mole, what advice would you give all the boards listening today? What's worked best for you? What are the bigger challenges? What suggestions do you have for everybody on the call? You're on mute, Mole.
Oh, okay, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, we can now. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was saying like, yeah, the only advice I have to give to everybody is to work like, have a plan. You have to have you have to have your plan, your internal plan. So you have to plan like for the next year, or I don't know, next 5 years, you have to have a internal plan. That's one of the things. The one thing we don't have, I've been like a challenging, I'm gonna be like probably challenging with it, is to have like a commissioning, like a contractor to come in and then to commission all of our schools. This is one of the things probably I'm gonna be working on in the next following probably months. Also probably working on the schedule. You have to be like get involved on the schedule for the school. Every time you have to go in tracking all those equipment that is not like it's working like a you know um, without people inside the building, right? uh,
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that's the only way, and then also invest in HVAC system. But the very good portion, probably I'm gonna add to finish, Ian. It's to work on the building. Probably I know that the building envelope it's a lot of money. Building envelope is a lot of money. So it doesn't matter like if you have like a last technology. I mean like the more efficient technology in your building, if your building envelope it's like I don't know how to say that, it's like out you can see from the outside,
Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't help a lot. So yeah.
A lot more work to be done. Jacob, moving on to you. You're the most improved school board in sustainable schools reporting. What guidance do you have for everybody? What's worked for you? What are the challenges to be overcome?
We haven't really made many advances in building envelope, but I couldn't agree more. The schools that have a good building envelope, I almost like it's -5 out here today. I almost don't even need to heat them unoccupied. They hold the heat so well. But we'll walk away from that for a second. The biggest thing for me is our school board's a little spoiled because we have a lot newer schools than most school boards just because of Simcoe County's growth in the last 20 years. But at the same time, a couple of my predecessors ago, Rick Ketteringham, consolidated all of our building automation into one system, in which that set point luckily does all the work for. So a lot of our programs are similar. So if I find issues with certain programs that I can make more efficient, I can actually spread that board wide as long as it's the same type of system. Like if it's an air handler versus heat pump system, obviously it's different, but anything that's a normal air handler program, I can pretty much look board wide and make those changes. A big thing for me is that I don't know exactly how a lot of these other systems works and the other boards, but what temperature do you put in when you're looking for a supply air set point? Ours is usually based on outside air temps, but let's say that your average space temperature is equal to the average space set point. What determines what temperature your air handler is going to put in? Because when it's -5 outside, if I see a supply air set point that's like 17 degrees in an elementary school, then it's way too low. Like you can literally free cool an elementary school with 19, 20 degrees right now. So you're bringing
it's
in
back to the BAS as everything.
That's right. And micro adjustments. I'm finding like, I have over 100 schools. So if I can make a small adjustment in each school, I'm saving a ton of money by the time I get those bills, right?
Yeah. Let me step on Michelle, the most efficient board and the long distances to cover, and your senior guys retiring. What advice have you got? What else can go wrong? What have you got for everybody?
So for Jacob, your last question there, we on the reset of the supplier temperature, try to do a program where it's the return temperature and a mixture of a few sensors from your rooms, and you'll be more precise than outside air. We've done that on many of our air handling units.
Okay.
So that's for us, building automation technician was our thing for the last 10 years. Got all our schools with BMS except one, which is going to close anyways. Scheduling to remove waste. We for the custodians, we don't run it at night. We set it for like tournaments or whatever for community use. Permit holders, we have override buttons in the gyms. We tell them if you want, you can turn it on. Building envelope, we're big on that. One school in Chapleau had construction of a brick wall, a 2-inch airspace, and a block wall, 2-inch airspace and brick, and they had filled that with vermiculite, which contained asbestos, and from 1972, and all the brick, with all this moisture and freeze thaw, was all. So we took down all the brick, foamed it 5 inches, and we put Steny panels. And this completed like in June. So this is going to be the first year. I'm expecting propane, instead of being 50,000, it's going to be 5,000. So we're trying that. And there's another school here in town where we have to do the same thing because of issues with the brick and the moisture behind it. Night setback. If you can't do night setback in a room or a school or some rooms, there's got to be something that you could do with maybe the windows, underneath the windows. When we replaced windows, we also redid the wall underneath it, so that you can do night setback. Condensing boilers, we put them in long time ago. Even if the radiators, even if you have to run it at 160 during the winter. They will condense in the fall. They will condense in the spring, and bring you some savings there. ERVs, we specified TempF or BKM for our new projects, for our big projects, for the money that we got for the COVID ventilation. And if it's a small area or small space, we use the Life Breath, the dual core. Lighting, we were about 1/3 of our schools left to do, and we use OECM. That's a very good tool. So if you don't know, go look into the OECM. They have a short list of consultants that can study your schools, and then a short list of contractors. Very efficient, goes fast. And then we're doing one school with oil. We're going to convert it to heat pump, air-to-air heat pump with an electric backup and a solar field. And one as an EAS, Energy as a Service, which is going to come online in December, where we take a school that's already geothermal, but no AC in the school. So we're turning it and we're getting AC. And with the EAS, we found the way to build that in so that it doesn't cost us more, and the school will have AC. So those are the stuff we're doing, and always trying to figure out from VFA. Okay, the lights are not due, but the ceiling is due. Oh, look at that. We got to put new lights. So we use stuff like that. Then track the performances yearly. You do your energy report every year, rank them. Did it work? One thing I like to do with the UCD is look through the graphics. For example, for LED, you change them in March. You go and you should see the electrical line go down. So that's
Michelle, that's
how we do.
terrific. Let's take our last minute and pass on to Maurice if we could. Last word to you, Maurice.
Yeah, I'd like to also agree again with Jacob regarding the number of automation vendors that you have to deal with. We're fortunate we only have two, and we have over 500 schools that are on automation. So that greatly simplifies our ability to go in and look ourselves as to what's actually happening at the schools without having to rely on third parties to tell us how schools are operating. So that's a great advantage. And that leads to the other, probably more important thing that I would consider is to have a capable team that can look at schools, look at the BAS, go out to schools with a mechanical knowledge to not only understand the BAS, but the end devices, why things are working or not working. So having that capable team, and if you're a large enough board, you should be able to make a case to hire those individuals, whether it's full-time or you contract them in, whatever it is. You need that capable team so you can react quickly to issues. And on that front, we actually do have an opening here at the TDSB for a BAS. I'm very serious here. So we have an opening very shortly. So if anyone is interested in joining a dynamic team with great growth potential, please reach out to me through Ian.
And you heard it first at Sustainable Schools. It's a new Sustainable Schools recruitment agency. Love it.
Yes.
Excellent. And final slide, Carolyn, please. And apologies to everybody. We've gone a couple of minutes over, but
actually, this was our final slide.
Okay, no contact information. They know where to find you, so that's that works fine. So everybody, thanks for joining us. Look out on the Sustainable Schools website. The updated guide we'll send everybody a note. And stay tuned. 2025 is coming. It's another year closer to 2030. We will do everything we can to keep providing support and keep the heat on the fact that we need to get this right together. Thank you again. We know everybody on this call is busy. Thanks for taking the time out of your days. We hope you found this helpful, and more importantly, we hope you take away something that you can act upon immediately, where together we can again start bending the curve and going in the right direction. Thank you all, and have a wonderful day.